tanks, you name it. But when they were looking and counting it up, they found $29 million worth that they couldn't find. But this is, if you really think about it and you're thinking, how could we have more money for both our national defense and how could we have more money for like infrastructure? You hear people talk about infrastructure. People want to build roads. Republicans and Democrats want to build roads, but guess what? There's no money. We're $1 trillion short this year because we passed these class pans, spend whatever the hell you can find, whatever's not tied down, spend it and give it away. Both sides spend it, you know, there's no tomorrow. But if you say, how could we change our government? Where would there be some money that we could actually save? Well, really, some of it is in our foreign policy. We do not have enough, probably, for our military to be involved in 7 wars. We might have enough to be involved in maybe 3 or 2 or 1, or maybe we should not be involved in any of the ones we're involved at this point. You know, the thing is, we said after 9/11 we're going to go after those who attacked us, those who aided the attackers, and those who abetted them or supported them. They're all dead. We killed them all. And that's good. We should declare victory and come home from Afghanistan. Because right now we're over there nation building. Why do we have trouble with nation building? I'll give you a story from a Navy SEAL I met a couple years ago. He'd been in 19 years. He was a tough guy, like they all are. And he said, you know what? We can go anywhere. We can kill any of our enemies. We can do whatever you ask us to do. But he said the mistake is when the politicians tell us to plant the flag and create a country. We're just not very good at it. Most of our military don't want to be policemen. They don't want to create countries. They'd soon kill the enemy, come back home to their family. But we kill the enemy, and then we stay, and we stay, and we stay, and we build them schools, we build them roads. I mean, there are some schools that have been built 4 or 5 times and blown up 4 or 5 times by the Taliban. It's terrible that the Taliban doesn't want girls to go to school. It's terrible that the Taliban would do this. But don't the people who live there have some responsibility after we've given them $1 trillion to do something for themselves? And will people do something for themselves if you keep doing it for them? So really, there has to come a time when we come home. We spend $50 billion a year in Afghanistan. Our mission's over and we should come home. It's $50 billion a year that could be spent on infrastructure if you wanted to do that, or in maybe not having $1 trillion debt next year, or deficit next year. We're in a bunch of different places, though. When the soldiers were killed in Niger not too long ago, or Niger, a country in Africa, many people didn't even know where the country was, much less that we had 800 troops there. You say, well, it's only 800, it's not that many. Well, the problem is 800 sometimes becomes 8,000, and sometimes then becomes 80,000. Because we get in the middle of a civil war, and some of our guys get killed, we're like, well, gosh, we got to do more, not less. And nobody wants to come home after people have been killed. They want to go in and punish the enemy. But I don't know who the good people are in Niger, or who the bad people are, and what they're fighting about. And so I think sometimes it's very unclear who the good guys and bad guys are. We've been involved in the Syrian civil war for a long time, and we aided a group of people that many up here called the moderate Syrian rebels. Well, it turns out the moderate Syrian rebels were jihadists often. They hated Israel. The only people they didn't hate about as much as Israel was us. We gave anti-tank weapons to one group, and the leader of the group, within a week of getting our anti-tank weapons, said, you know, we want them to fight ISIS. They said, the hell with ISIS, we want to attack Assad, and when we're done with Assad, we want to attack Israel and get the Golan Heights back. These are the people we're giving weapons to. We poured hundreds of tons of weapons in there with Qatar, a lot of our weapons and a lot of our dollars running through Qatar, you know, running through United Arab Emirates, running through Saudi Arabia, just pour it in there. But a lot of them wound up in the wrong hands. We kept supporting these moderate fighters that didn't fight. We spent $250 million training 10 of them. We trained 10 fighters for $250 million. We sent them into battle, and they were captured in the first 30 minutes. But then guess what happened recently? And I will give President Trump some credit for this. They decided to ally with whoever was fighting the best over there, and it turned out the Kurds were. Both the Syrian Kurds and the Kurds that live in Iraq, and they did fight. But now, you know, the question is, oh, now Turkey's unhappy with that, so we're going to throw the Kurds under the bus in favor of Turkey that has a leader that really has no use for us at this point either. It's very, very confusing who the enemy is and who our friends are over there. But it's also very, very expensive. I think we have to defend ourselves, and we may occasionally have to attack the enemy overseas. But the thing is if we go and stay for decade after decade, you know, in Iraq, they said, oh, we didn't stay long enough. How long's long enough? 100 years, 200 years, forever? They don't see us. You know, we said they're going to treat us as liberators. They they kind of see us as occupiers. Afghanistan has hated every country that's ever come in there. They didn't like the Russians occupying them. They didn't like the British occupying them. They don't like us there. There was a movie with a depiction of this scene not too long ago, and they were in a village, and they just freed the village, and the general was telling them how you are free, or you're free, and the elders of the village gathered and said, will you leave now? Because they realized that wasn't the end, and that eventually the Americans would leave. When they left, the Taliban would come back. And we just have to rethink, are we going to be at war forever? Can we afford it? And maybe do we have to think about maybe whether or not we should do some nation building here at home and not always abroad? We have to think about the unintended consequences of what we do as well. And I'll give you an example of that. We just recently signed a deal to give Saudi Arabia over $350 billion worth of military equipment. Currently, Saudi Arabia is using that equipment to encircle and blockade a country next to them, Yemen. Yemen's a very poor country. They import about 80% of their food. They're one of the poorest countries on the planet, and currently 17 million people live on the edge of starvation. But people have convinced themselves that, well, there's some Shia that are supported by Iran, and we don't want Iran there, so we got to support the Sunnis. Does anybody remember who attacked us on 9/11? One of the Shias, it was the Sunnis. Most of the radical jihadists and the ones that have been trying to get into our country, in fact, I don't know of any Shia terrorists that have been here, to tell you the truth. We've had plenty of Sunni terrorists. 16 out of the 19 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. We just released documents last year, the missing pages from the Saudi Arabia investigation with 9/11 Commission, that shows that there's a possibility they were complicit in those things. They're not exactly a free country. They're a monarchy that is actually having power consume and concentrate in one person's hands more and more. So we have to decide, what wars do we need to be involved in? Our founders were very clear about this. Our founders didn't like war, by the way. Our founders had seen virtually perpetual war in Europe. Everybody was always fighting somebody, and went on even after the founding of our country. Cousins were fighting cousins, fathers fighting brothers, brothers fighting brothers. Everybody was related. All the royal families of Europe were related, and they're always fighting with each other. Of course, they didn't do the fighting. They sent the common man to do the fighting. So when we got to our country, we said, we've got these oceans, enough of that, we want less war. So one of the things they included in the Constitution was this. They included in the Constitution a very specific provision that said when we go to war, we have to declare war, and it has to be passed by Congress. So there was a debate over whether that power should be in Congress or should be in the hands of the president. And Madison said this. He said that the executive, the president, is the branch most prone to war. Therefore, with studied care, we gave that power to the legislature. So war is supposed to be determined by us, and ultimately us as representatives of you. It doesn't happen that way, and it hasn't happened that way for a long time. Why are we at war in 7 different places? We don't vote on it. We haven't voted on anything really since the proclamation for the Iraq War, which I think was a mistake, but we at least voted on it back in 2002. We voted in 2001 to go into Afghanistan after those who attacked us. But we haven't voted on anything since. They say, oh, the 2001 proclamation gives us the power to go anywhere, because these people could somehow tangentially, most of the people who are fighting now weren't even born and have nothing to do with 9/11 and nothing to do with Afghanistan. And yet we're in perpetual war and we haven't voted on it. So once again, it's the process that's broken, like the budget. So we have extraordinary waste, and your money gets burned and put in a closet and thrown down a waste hole because we don't do the right process of following your money. And war is somewhat the same way. We get involved in war in too many places because we don't have a vigorous debate. When we go to war, I tell people that should be the most important decision we ever make, most important decision a legislator ever makes. This should be a profound, moral, personal decision, as if your kids are going or as if you are going. And it should be a heartfelt debate, and everybody should speak out, and we should try to figure out whether it's right to go to war. And interestingly, when we've been attacked, we've been nearly unanimous. When we were attacked at Pearl Harbor, they voted, and I think one person opposed it in Congress, and everybody else voted for it. When we were attacked on 9/11, same thing. And I would have voted for that response. We should have responded. It was the right thing. But we voted. We did the right thing. But since then, we're now at war everywhere in countries that most of us haven't heard of, fighting on one side or the other. We don't even know what we're fighting for, and it costs an extraordinary amount of money, but we're not voting on it. Maybe if we did the right thing, maybe if, like appropriations, we passed the appropriation bills, maybe if war, we voted on it, we wouldn't be in so many places. but they're all interconnected because they're interconnected to the shortness that we have in money.